Tips at 3. My name is Jenny, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about homeschooling styles using the classical method. So, homeschooling, and what is the classical method? So, this week, Chia's Tips at 3 are all focused on different types of homeschooling styles. So, we looked at a little bit what traditional schooling would look like and Charlotte Mason, and so today is the classical method. I want to preface this with the fact that I'm not an expert, but our family has been utilizing this style for several years. So I'm going to go over what it looks like and how we've implemented it in our home and just kind of the history of where it comes from. So the term classical is actually pretty new, but the implementation of it is not. It goes all the way back to the Renaissance era, where students were expected to learn a vast variety of different topics and ideas and be able to converse and relate those ideas with other ideas and with other people. And so the classical method is just this idea that we are giving our students or ourselves a lot of information and then learning how to assimilate that and then talk about it. So looking at classical method, there's a term that comes up quite frequently that was new to me when I heard it. It's called the trivium. And trivium broken down means like 3 ways or 3 paths. And that's essentially referring to the 3 different stages of learning that children go through. So when you look at a child, you'll notice that just in how they act, how they behave, what they question, what their ideas are, it changes throughout their life. So I'll break down the 3 stages, and then we'll look at what each one is and what that looks like in how you educate, and then just how our children act in those ages. So the 3 stages are grammar. And that you're looking at like the elementary years. You have dialectic or logic. That would be the middle grade years. And then rhetoric, and that's into high school. So looking at the grammar stage, what does that mean? And what does that look like? And how would you homeschool? If you were choosing to implement the classical method, what would that look like in your home? So when you look at your young children. Now, my girls are 10 and 11. They're in kind of in between the grammar and the dialectic stage, and I can still see hints of both in them. But when you look at, let's say, your 4, 5, 6-year-old, what are their strengths? Memorizing, absorbing information. In fact, God designed children at a young age to absorb massive amounts of information. When you look at a newborn and a 3-year-old, I mean, there is a huge difference in how they're able to move and think and operate and the words that they can say, because they're just sponges absorbing lots of information. So in the grammar stage, we want to use that. We want to, another term I've heard a lot is we teach with the grain. So if your students are capable of memorizing quickly and easily, give them lots and lots of information. One of the things that kind of a lot of people will question in regards to the classical method is the types of information or the amount, what you're teaching your children, because my girls have memorized a lot of information that means absolutely nothing to them right now. And the best analogy that I have heard actually goes to when you have a newborn and you are rocking them to sleep at night. I don't know about you, but I was singing nursery rhymes to my children. I was even singing the ABCs at 6 months, 1 year. The ABCs meant nothing to my girls. They didn't understand what those letters could or would do. But they memorized the song with me. They could sing it with me. They could sing a lot of nursery rhymes. So what if the information that we were giving them at a young age was information that would be relevant later on? Again, it means nothing when they're learning it, but it's creating memory pegs, just these little ideas that they get to retrieve later. One example of this, and it's a very unique example, but our family had a really incredible opportunity to travel to India last year. And we flew into Mumbai, also known as Bombay. And we were there with a family from our church. And our girls were asking, why do you keep calling it Mumbai and other people call it Bombay? And so the gentleman from our church started to explain imperialism, and the British rule of India. And my girls had already learned these vocabulary words. During the age of imperialism, the British established rule over India. This is a line that they memorized, a song they memorized. And so suddenly this information that meant nothing to them several months before started to take shape in a very relevant way. So again, going with the nursery rhyme idea, we're just giving information that may or probably will be relevant to their learning down the road. And I mean, I see it as a gift that you're giving your children when you introduce them to rulers and geography and dates and ideas, as much as they can grasp onto at an early age. And they begin to learn about these ideas and unpack them later on. It's just going to be a benefit to them. All right, so that's like the grammar age. And for us, our daily routine includes reviewing memory work that they've been learning that week. They have, now I have two girls that are very close in age, so it makes it very easy. They get a set of flashcards or a book or whatever it is that their memory work is coming from, and they review a lot of it with each other. But you can use songs. YouTube is full of songs. I'll point you to some resources we are using, but there's a lot of resources for finding memory work, and then there's a lot of different ways to implement the reviewing and the learning of the memory work in your homes. But I'm going to keep moving on. So the grammar stage is that absorbing information. It's that foundation that lays, or you're laying the foundation for later education and learning. So what is that next stage? So I have a tween, and for anybody who has or has had a tween or a teen, you know the why, the little eye roll and the why, what for, what, the questioning. That is like a great introduction to this next stage is asking questions. Suddenly your kids go from just being curious and willing to memorize to now they need to know why. They need to know what. How does this relate to this? That's dialectic. That's logic. It is learning how things relate to one another, the cause and the effect. So you're really starting to unpack ideas. And like I said, my girls are 10 and 11, and so we are moving from one stage slowly into another. They're still willing and happy to memorize a lot of information, but I'm finding they have a lot more questions about that information. Why did the British rule over India? Well, let's unpack that. Let's find the answer. And so during this stage, you're helping guide your children to breaking down ideas, learning how to ask a really good question and then find accurate information that answers that question. And so this is a stage where they are learning to become thinkers and wrestle with little ideas. As they move into the rhetoric stage, they'll begin to wrestle with bigger ideas, but we're still training them how to receive information, unpack it. This is where we're defining terms and we're doing our research to really understand an idea. Another example that was given to me was, now I'm not a musician. I did a couple years of piano lessons and I was terrible. But I do understand the process of learning an instrument in the simplest of forms. I did not begin composing music in my first year of lessons. I learned where middle C is, and I learned what a chord was. And my fingers got used to moving along the keys. I learned very basic, simple music theory. I learned what a note was and how to read it on a page. Then I learned a very basic song that somebody else had written. And I learned to play it until I could play it very well. Be very honest, I never actually learned to play any song very well, but that was the intention. And the idea was when I learned to play one song very well, I would move on to a more complicated song or a complicated idea. So that's essentially what classical education is. You start with the very basics, the grammar of it, learn what the notes are and how to read them and what a song is, and then move on and begin to wrestle with this, this little piece of music. And as you learn how to play the songs, the larger songs, the more difficult songs actually become a little bit easier. So that's the dialectic stage. You're combining facts with logic and you're assimilating that information. And then the final stage is rhetoric. Now, the goal of a classical education is to be a persuasive communicator. And that starts with the thinking and the understanding how to wrestle with an idea. And then it moves into the ability to accurately communicate your opinions and ideas. And that's when that's what you're doing in the rhetoric stage. You are beginning to wrestle with really difficult, hard ideas. And you are hopefully doing this with other people. The classical method is really based on language and rhetoric and persuasion, logic. So the ideal would be that you could be involved in a community or have people around you that could help encourage the dialogue, the conversation. Hi, I'm just seeing these. I'm not like amazing at live. This is very new to me, but I'm seeing a couple of comments. Thanks, Susan, and hi, Michelle. All right, so one thing that, as I jump back, so that was kind of a stage by stage view of the classical method, but jumping back, it can seem very daunting to jump in because, what information do you want to give to your children and how do you help them develop these ideas? When you look at any classical education or curriculum, the guiding factor through the whole thing is really history. So we take history as kind of the thread that we follow from beginning to end, and we overlap ideas and other subjects to help us understand how knowledge relates with other pieces of knowledge. In traditional schooling or the modern idea of schooling, when you're learning science, you have a laser focus on science. When you're learning math, it's a laser focus on math. And the classical method kind of wants to break down that. If you're learning geography, why not learn about the science that was developed? Or if you're learning about a certain period in history, what scientific ideas were thought of or brought to focus in that period of time. When you are learning about a country, how did that country interact with another country? You during that that era. So history, we follow the timeline of history from ancients all the way to modern day, and we relate all the ideas and facts that we can during that period of history, if that makes sense. Yes, Susan, everything is rooted in history. And then I want to preface this or jump and mention that, for our family and a lot of classical learners, the history starts with the Word of God, the Bible, and everything that we learn branches out from that as our foundation. The Bible is the foundation for all truth. And it's really interesting as we've been learning science, how many scientific principles are actually mentioned in the Bible. And a lot of scientists who discovered those principles discovered it because they knew the Word of God. Um, so, yeah, so I kind of explained a little bit about how our week works. We do work on memorization. We work on just reviewing a lot of the basic concepts. Now, my girls are getting into, I have one daughter that's entering pre-algebra, but one of the things we're working on with math is continuing with things like memory, mental math, the ability to do memorization or multiplication very quickly, working on, remembering what the associative law is and the commutative law, things like that will help her as she jumps into pre-algebra and algebra. We work on what a preposition is and an adverb is, just the basic definitions, so that as we're diagramming sentences, they're easier to spot. So breaking down information, and so we are working on our memorization. We are working on our how science and history and math, all that relate, and so a lot of our education overlaps as we move through from subject to subject. And we're jumping into more of the discussion. So we do have a lot of discussions about ideas and concepts. We do a lot of stopping to look something up if there's a missed concept or something, because my girls are in that stage where they want to ask a question and have it answered. So some resources. My introduction to the classical method started with, can you see that? The Well-Trained Mind. It is a ginormous book. It looks different now because I have an old copy, but it's a fantastic resource. Now, part of the reason why it's so big is because it does offer a lot of suggestions for curriculum to check out, to help guide you if you are trying to follow the classical method. Classical Christian education made approachable. Sorry. This is also a fantastic resource. This kind of helps parallel other ideas, or like modern education versus what a classical education would look like. Another book that I really, really loved, but I cannot find my copy of, is The Core by Lee Bortons. We are a part of a classical conversations community. We have been a part of a classical conversations community for 4 years, technically. We did take a 2-year break, but that's been a fantastic opportunity for our family, just because it's helped give us guidance as we follow the classical method. It's also given us that community that we need to as we progress through the classical method, to have those conversations and that dialogue. They offer a great opportunity for my girls to practice their presentation skills, speaking in front of people, which can be very intimidating. So that's one of the resources that we use. Additionally, I'm going to keep throwing out some random resources for, so I didn't mention Latin. Latin is actually a big part of the classical method. If you are pursuing classical education for your family, Latin is actually a key element. And the reason for that is, again, when you look at going back to the foundation, Latin makes up of like 60%, more than 60% of the English language. And when you get into polysyllabic words, it's a lot higher than that. Something like 80-90% of our words are made up from Latin. And so when we truly understand the meaning of a word, it helps in our conversation, in formulating opinions, and in defining words. So Latin is key. This is a resource that was suggested to me by a friend who runs a school, and she said that their kids do stellar on tests, on the SAT-10 test, because they know their Latin roots. So we just implemented that as a resource this year. One final story, just to help relate what a classical education is. So I like to tell people that when my younger daughter, so she's 10 now, but when she was 8-9 years old, she had read most of Shakespeare's plays. And people get really surprised by that. She has a favorite. She has some that she doesn't like as much. But I will give you the the truth. She read Usborne's illustrated stories from Shakespeare. Now, she read this. She absolutely adored it. And she knows Shakespeare. She knows the characters. She knows the plots. She understands the stories. But it was a very simple form of the story. In a couple years, I will have her reread Shakespeare. It'll still be an abridged version. It'll be something a little bit more difficult than this, but I do highly recommend this. But it won't be Shakespeare's original works. Now, when we jump into high school and we are actually reading Shakespeare's plays, which I had to do in high school, and I, didn't understand them. I had to read the Cliff Notes to understand them. But she probably won't have to read the Cliff Notes because she'll know the characters, she'll know the stories, she'll know the plot and the climax and all that because she's been introduced to them. And that's the idea with the classical model. You want to introduce your kids to these ideas gradually and then slowly let them understand them, unpack them, and then form opinions about them. That's a lot of information. If you have any questions about the classical method, again, refer to the resources. The Core by Lee Bortons and The Well-Trained Mind are both excellent resources to help unpack what the classical method is. I would highly suggest an article you can look up online by Dorothy Sayers is The Lost Tools of Learning. And that's where a lot of modern day ideas about classical or the classical method have come from, was from an article that she wrote. But also, please feel free to ask questions about the classical method or anything, really. I just want to remind you that she is here to support you during this time. We love homeschoolers, and we really want to offer a hand to help you if you have any questions or needs. Please feel free to reach out. And don't miss tomorrow's tips at 3, as Katie helps us to look at what an eclectic homeschooling style would be. And that's kind of taking a little bit of everything and putting it into one pot. So don't miss that. Thanks for tuning in today, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.